Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome. This is Matthew Msingati, the hybrid, the designer, and a developer. Thank you so much for clicking this video. This is a GraphQL series, but it's very important for me to tell you who is this series for and who this series is not for, so that if it's not for you, respectfully and understandably, you can quickly skip the series and go to some other videos. This series, it's not about Visual Studio Code. It's not about the technicality of GraphQL. We are not going to code at all. It is not about Apollo server. It's not about the resolvers. It's not about technically the code. But this video, it's about the concepts. To make it clear to you, why it is that you can follow a tutorial through and finish the project, and when you run it, it works perfectly. But when it comes to you doing your own project, then things are starting to be a little bit difficult. The other guy said, I think it was Redix, he said that I have been following a lot of tutorials, but it looks like I can't create my own thing, and I really don't understand why. As for me, learning from YouTube and internet, I exactly knew what he meant. When you follow somebody coding, you are learning. Yes, I don't dispute that, but you are learning the syntax. You are not learning the concept. Let me hit the point home. Somebody who has learned the syntax, who has followed a technical video on GraphQL on YouTube, they can produce a working class module or a function. They can code, but they are not able to answer interview questions. Something that also I've struggled with in terms of CSS and JavaScript. I knew how to create functions and how to make apps with JavaScript and CSS. But the other day I got an international interview. The questions were somewhat difficult, if I can be honest, because there I was not being asked CSS properties, how to do these questions that feels like they are high school questions just to test your rationale. No, I was being asked on the overall understanding. The employer wants to see, do I understand the concept? This series, it's about that concept, the GraphQL concept. So if you are looking for a video where you are going to code, I am sorry, and I understand if you might skip this video. I want to ban the concept of GraphQL so that when you are following another video that teaches you the syntax, it might feel familiar. My point number one, as you can see, I don't have a point where I'm asking what is GraphQL. I don't want you to describe GraphQL because I would like to believe the creators of GraphQL have a better definition for it. Google has a better definition for it than me. If Google doesn't work, we've got ChatGPT. ChatGPT can give you a very clear and a succinct definition. Hence, I don't have point number one, which asks, what is GraphQL? I want you to feel that you understand GraphQL. You cannot really come up with a definition in terms of the English language, but you feel like you know it through and through. This is when you understand the concept. Without wasting time, let's just jump to point number one. This is how I'm going to get and ban the concept into your mind. Where does it fit? Where does GraphQL fit into a stack of technology? Okay. We've got a stack of technology. What do I mean by that? We've got MongoDB, we've got Express.js, we've got React.js, we've got Node.js. There's a lot of things going on in technology. But where does GraphQL fit in there? Picture a spider web, okay? Whenever you see a spider web, somewhere in that web, you will see where the spider is. In most cases, it's always sitting in the center. I want you to spot GraphQL, where it fits in this tech stack. For me, that will help you to understand the concept of GraphQL and the problem it's trying to solve. In continuing from this point number 1, I would like to quote the famous Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs once asked, and he said, this is very important. As Apple, as a company, as a brand, we wanted to know, where do we fit in this noisy world? Okay, meaning that understanding the location, in our case, in terms of concept, where GraphQL fits into a tech stack, okay, it's very important so that you can understand the concept. Point number 2, what problem is it trying to solve? This question, or the answer to this question, will get you to be part of a conversation. If you are a coder, you are technical, you know how to code and create beautiful apps or functional apps, you might lose sight of a conversation. Maybe you have seen in the industry or in YouTube, there is GraphQL. You go and watch the video, but you can't get into the conversation. If two guys or two programmers have a conversation around GraphQL, you don't feel like you can say something, okay? It's because you are a syntax developer. You know the syntax of it, but you don't understand what GraphQL is trying to solve. Hence, you have eliminated yourself from the conversation. So, in this series, I will discuss what problem is GraphQL trying to solve. Number 3, the techniques used to solve the problem. Every library, every piece of technology, beyond just becoming a programming language or a library, it's a school of thought. It's a certain way of doing things. React, it's an idea, it's a suggestion, it's some sort of an opinion about what we can do as a industry to improve ourselves or to make things better. GraphQL is not different. It's some sort of a certain concept, okay? So, meaning that I'm going to talk about the techniques that GraphQL is using, okay? So, the more you understand those techniques, okay, and the angle at which GraphQL is coming from, that will serve as a solid foundation to understand the syntax when you are actually coding. When you watch a GraphQL tutorial or a video, you will always feel confused about the resolvers, about the Apollo server. You can't really fit in. As you are still looking at that now, there is MongoDB, and then somebody will tell you that you cannot only use MongoDB, you can use another database management system. So it's a lot of things. When you don't know the concept, the technique used to solve the problem that GraphQL is solving, the syntax might be difficult for you to understand. And also, you cannot take some sort of a full use of GraphQL. Point number 4, affected concept. As I am telling you that concepts are important, there are concepts that GraphQL is affecting, or some sort of GraphQL is a node in a network of concept. So there are concepts that GraphQL is some sort of working with, some others is disrupting, some others is crashing at all. It's very important to understand what are the concepts that are involved. So I've got a list of concepts that are involved. This is not limited to this list. There's a lot of concepts, but these are important for you to understand and master GraphQL. For instance, API. API is affected by GraphQL because GraphQL is coming with a certain way of doing things around the API. Data fetching. GraphQL is coming with a certain way of doing things when it comes to data fetching. So data fetching is a concept that is affected, okay? It's in the same network on which GraphQL is trying to shake or is trying to improve. Data structure. When I mean data structure, I'm just talking about the database itself. Like we've got your MySQL, we've got your NoSQL databases, we've got your MongoDBs. Okay, so every database has got a certain structure, or let me just use the term schema. Okay, so GraphQL is part of that. It's improving it. It's working towards making it easier. Okay, I'm going to talk about concept on point number 4. Concept like underfetching and overfetching. Obviously at point number 5, schemas and resolvers. When you were in primary, okay, in primary school, the technique that the school system is using, even though to us as the enlightened or the elite guys, we always feel like the education system is slowing us down because we want to get our hands dirty to do something. We always ask questions like, why do I have to sit and study X and solve for X and the theorem of Pythagoras instead of getting into the real world and solve the real problem? The most phenomenal thing about the education system, even though we always feel like it's low, it's very good on taking a student from the known to the unknown. The school system is taking a learner through a journey of what is familiar to the student, taking them slowly, step by step, slowly but surely to an advanced and unfamiliar world. Okay, the system doesn't just push you from 0 to grade 12 or grade 11 or to form 2 or to a higher level, or pushes you to varsity, because that's a swift transition. But they start with what you know and what is familiar to you, and they will take you step by step until you get the idea. Okay, it's like they are feeding the inner eye of understanding. If you want to know what is the inner eye of understanding, it's when you are talking to John trying to explain calculus or physics or programming. When John says, oh, I see, that's what I mean about the inner eye of understanding. Most YouTube tutorials, they don't feed that inner eye, but it's do what I do, follow me, do this and do that, code this, this is the error, solve it like this. Here, I want you to get the concept so that you can be fit and ready to answer the interview question. Because in the interview, the employer wants to understand that, do you understand the concept? So that when the problem presents itself different from the video that you have learned on YouTube, you could be able to generate your own unique ideas and solve the problem. In closing, I am going to quote the famous Jim Rohn. He says, don't be a follower, be a student. Take what you have been given, make it your product of your own conclusion. I'm Matthew, the hybrid, the designer and developer. See you on the next one. Hello and welcome. I'm Matthew, the hybrid, the designer and developer. This is a GraphQL series, which is meant to drill and bend the concept and understanding of GraphQL in such a way that you can be able to answer interview questions that test your overall understanding. Where does GraphQL fits in? What do I mean by that? I am asking, since there is all pieces of technologies, a lot of pieces of technologies, Node.js, React.js, JavaScript, and you name them, where does GraphQL fits in? In order for us to understand where does GraphQL fits in, we just need to take a train back into database querying. Okay, how do we access information from the database, or what applications are doing with the information that we are feeding them. Okay, so if this is an application, let me just quickly change the color there. If this is an application, it receives data from the UI. We send a lot of information about ourselves in the application and in the websites, in applications like Facebook. When you start a new account, you always give a lot of information about you. So you are feeding the application. Obviously, since the application has got different environment, the application can be on the web and the application can be on the mobile. So the app itself doesn't really store this information. This information is stored somewhere else. And where that is, in a server, in a database. Okay, so the idea here is the application takes the information when it knows that it's 100% correct or it's suitable for the database. It will send it to the database, and also it will query the information from the database. Okay, so this part, it's the front end. Okay, and then let me just say this part, it's the back end. Okay, so it's like we are sending information to the database and we are retrieving it. Okay, so let's just look at the pieces of technologies that are involved, a network of technologies, or let's just call it a tech stack. Okay, all the pieces of technologies that are involved in this process. Okay, only those that are involved in getting the information in to the database and getting it back. Okay, so what we can learn from here is that we've got a database. Okay, we've got a database. There is a lot of databases. Okay, we've got a database. A database is just a storage container that stores the information. Usually it is not in the application and it is not in the user interface. That's what we need to know here. Okay, and then there is an application. Okay, when I'm talking about the application, I'm just referring to some sort of a tech, okay, or a language or an SDK, okay, some sort of the programming language or techniques that have been used to create the app. As you know that there is a lot of languages. There is PHP, you create web apps. There is Kotlin and Java for Android apps. There is a lot of languages. There is React.js, there is Next.js. Okay, so when I'm talking about the app, okay, I'm talking about like the pieces of technologies, the language, and the SDK. Here I'm talking about all the databases, you name them, MongoDB, NoSQL, SQL databases. I'm talking about all of them. Okay, and then in the front end, okay, somewhere here, let's say in the UI, okay, let's just say that we've got your React.js. Okay, let's say, okay, as a UI library or a library for building user interfaces. Okay, so what we are starting to learn from this, okay, is that we've got the user interface, which is the front end, we've got the application, and we've got the back end. Okay, so what we are going to do, we are going to zoom in, okay, in this process of sending information from the application to the database and the database back to here. Matthew, what do you mean? I'm trying to say GraphQL in some way here. I have already started to pinpoint a location, okay, for GraphQL, even though I'm going to zoom in, but please pin GraphQL in this part. Okay, this is the location of GraphQL. So whenever we are talking about GraphQL, obviously we are using some of the GraphQL functionalities in the front end. I understand that, but we are just sending the information. Okay, that's it. It's not the core essence. Okay, user interface is some sort of a node that is affected into this network, but it doesn't carry the essence of what GraphQL is trying to solve. Okay, the problem domain of GraphQL is somewhere between the application itself and the database. Okay, so let's say you are trying to speak to someone, okay, and a loud and a silly and a noisy guy interrupts you, okay, and says something else before the information reaches the other part. Okay, so GraphQL is doing that. The application wants to communicate to send information to the database, and GraphQL comes and say, whoa, this is the better way of doing things. I hope you understand where GraphQL fits in, even though we're going to get into details, but I hope you understand where it is. I hope I have managed to some sort of focus your mind into a certain section of the program development lifecycle, or the application architecture. Okay, so between the app and the database, let's talk about how things were done before. Obviously, GraphQL is not some sort of a new way, but it's some sort of an improvement. GraphQL is improving something that has been there. Okay, so if this is the database, okay, if this is the database and this is the application, okay, there was a way before GraphQL by which we communicate to the database. Okay, number one, instead of communicating directly from the app to the database and the database to the app, okay, there is a middleman here, and that middleman is API. Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what that is. So there is a middleman, and that middleman is API. Okay, now we are introducing another term. Okay, and then we're not going to get in details into APIs, but APIs exposes endpoints. Okay, okay, meaning that this is a front end, it ends here, and this is a back end, it ends here. Somewhere in between, okay, there are points here which are exposed by an API. Okay, let's just say users. Okay, the front end does whatever it does, but it ends here in this point. Okay, after this, the API will communicate with the database, and then it will send back all the information about users. Okay, then let's say here there is employees. Okay, and then here there is like some sort of balances, let's say. Okay, as you can see that there is an API which exposes endpoints. Okay, however, there is some sort of a problem with this system. Okay, meaning based on how we were doing things, okay, if you are hitting this endpoint, what you will get, what is that the API will do? Okay, an API on the user's endpoint, okay, let's say the address of this will be like API forward slash endpoint. Okay, so as soon as the user interface or the front end makes a fetch request to this API, usually it's in form of a URL. Okay, let me just give you an example. Okay, it's gonna be, let's say, coded design, www.codeddesign forward slash API forward slash users. Okay, this endpoint is responsible for giving you a list of users. Okay, okay, this endpoint, it's like a cooked food. Okay, some sort of a bucket with a list of users. What if maybe you want to only get one user instead? Okay, it will mean that the API needs to expose another endpoint. Okay, which will enable you to get only one user. Okay, What if maybe you want to get certain users by a certain criteria? Okay, that means the API need to expose another endpoint. Okay, the API need to expose another endpoint. Okay, so that you can get that. Okay, as you can see here, we are starting to have a lot of endpoint. Okay, now hitting the point home, getting deep into where does GraphQL fits into this tech stack. Okay, we have identified here, okay, that GraphQL is somewhere there in the back end. Okay, somewhere there in the back end, it's in between the app and the database. Okay, now we said before we had some ways in which we are communicating. GraphQL is not like the Mr. Know-it-all or very new, or GraphQL doesn't really invent things. Okay, but it's coming with a certain way and approach, a school of thought. Okay, so we were using these APIs. So the problem with these APIs is that when you hit this point, you might get 10 records. Okay, whereas you only wanted one record. Okay, mathematically you can see that if I'm looking for one record and I always get 10 record, I have a duty to pick up the record that I want. If I was looking for record number 4, I have to pick up record number 4. But GraphQL comes as a superhero. Okay, GraphQL comes as a superhero to say that, okay, you are using API, I understand that, but I can act as an API myself. Okay, meaning that eliminating the API. Okay, so that when you want, as an app, you want to communicate to your database, you can communicate through me. It will happen. You just need to brief me and give me the details of your data structure. Okay, what is the structure, the schema of your data? And provide, let me just write here. Okay, provide me with your data structure. Let's say the structure of your data. Okay, on users, we've got a user ID. Let's say user ID and username. Okay, this ID, it's a number. My apologies for my bad writing. This ID is a number and the name is a string. Okay, you provide GraphQL with this schema. Okay, the structure of your data, and then from there GraphQL will ask you, okay, now provide me with some functions. Let's say, okay, some functions that I'm going to use when exposing information back to your user interface or back to your front end. Okay, let's say we are going to have a function here which is going to be get user. Okay, and let's say get all users. Okay, as you can see here, you are getting a user and here you are getting all users. Okay, and then let me just erase this. My apologies for that. Let me just erase this. Let me first not get into some sort of functions, okay, so that I can hit the point home. Okay, so that you can see the essence of GraphQL. Okay, now GraphQL knows your structure. Okay, you've got the ID and the name. Okay, now let's see how different GraphQL is from the API. Okay, the API had endpoints. Okay, GraphQL tells us that if you have given me the structure, okay, of your data, okay, and also you have introduced me to your actual data as GraphQL. Okay, you have introduced me to your actual data. I can use the structure of your data, okay, the form, how your data is, okay, to query, okay, meaning that I'm replacing the API to query the information. But I don't only do that, okay, once the information is here with me, meaning that once I have the ID, okay, a list of IDs, let's say from 1 up to 1,000, 1, 2, 3 up to 1,000, and also the names from 1 up to 1,000. Okay, you can tell me in a very simple way, instead of hitting an endpoint, you can just, from your front end, you can just create a JSON object which will look like users, and then tell me that you want the name and close that. Okay. And then from then I will deliver only, okay, the list of names. Okay. What if maybe you want with some IDs, you can just add that. You don't need to work that much. Okay. As you can see, now we have erased these endpoints, a lot of endpoints here. Okay. Meaning that by substituting this endpoint and putting GraphQL between the database and the application, remember, we wanted to know where does GraphQL is, okay? We were saying it's between the application and the database. Now, between the application and the database, there is an API. So GraphQL is coming in and saying to the API, can I sit where you are and make things better for the developers, okay, to improve the developer experience and efficiency of the overall application. So not only GraphQL is between the database and the application, but GraphQL is sitting here where the application, the API is. GraphQL is sitting here to say that, look, I can do this job better than you. So meaning that on your front end, you just give me a JSON object and tell me what you want. What if maybe I want this information in a different way? GraphQL is saying that you don't need to hit multiple endpoints. I can do that for you. Okay. Now, let's just extend this awesomeness of GraphQL. Okay. This database, okay, let's say it's my SQL or it's MongoDB or whatever, okay, it has got some sort of tables, okay, or group of information, okay. This is users, this is authors, these are employees, and these are balances, okay. Now GraphQL is sitting here as a gatekeeper saying, with me you can just tell me what you want. You don't have to worry about the protocol. You don't have to worry about a lot of things. You can just tell me what you want. It's like, as a developer, you are in a shop, okay, driving a shopping cart. I hope this looks like a shopping cart. Let me just do this and do this. You are driving a shopping cart, so you are shopping for things that you want in these tables, okay. This table is users, this table is balances, this table is employees, this table is authors, okay, let's say. Now, instead of hitting multiple endpoints with GraphQL, you can just have a query, okay, and list what you want from here. In users, you want the username. In balances, you want the sum total. In employees, you want the employee IDs. And in, what did I say this is? Whatever it is, okay, it's balances, employees. I just forgot what this one is. Okay, in whatever, you can say amount. Okay, let's say this is amount. And then after you've got that, what do you do next? You drive your shopping cart to your UI. Okay, your shopping cart to your UI, and then you tell the UI that, please display this for me. So meaning that you can even get some sort of data from different tables or different schemas, I can say, with peace. Okay, so I hope now you are starting to get where does GraphQL fits in. Okay, there is the front end. Okay, there is a front end. Let's say the front end is React.js. Obviously, you are going to use GraphQL in your front end because the method that you will be using to fetch the data from a GraphQL server, okay, you need to some sort of use the preferred way of doing that, GraphQL's preferred way of doing it. So you will find GraphQL in your UI, but remember, this is not a problem domain. GraphQL was not solving how you are fetching data from the UI, okay? But you can find it there. You are going to work with it in React, okay? And then when you are fetching data into the back end, okay? Meaning that now GraphQL is forming part of your back end of your API, what can I say, code, okay, or code base. GraphQL will be there, okay, so that it can act as a gatekeeper to make things easier for you. GraphQL, it's like these new technologies, things like Siri and whatsoever, okay? These are technologies where you can just get into your house and you can tell it to switch on the light and close the gates, okay? I think it's pushing us to that direction where it's going to be super simple and efficient, okay, to get data so that you cannot sit with a lot of data that you still have to filter or to pick what you want. If it happened that you want something different from this collection of data, you will have to hit another endpoint. Where does GraphQL fits in? GraphQL is somewhere between the actual application and the database. To be specific, it's sitting where the API sits to make your life easier. I'm Matthew, the hybrid, the designer and developer. Please don't forget, if this video has helped you in the overall understanding of GraphQL, just hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, for me, see you on the next one. Hello and welcome. I am Matthew the hybrid, the designer and developer. Thank you so much for clicking this video. If you are new, I've got the videos that I've already done in this series. What problem is GraphQL trying to solve? In order for us to answer that, let's just look at the history of data fetching and how we used to do things. Let's say we've got a database here, okay, with tables. This table is for users. This is another table, and this is another table, okay. Let's say we are creating an accounting system, okay. So let's say this one, it's users, okay. There's username, user ID, and whatever, okay. And then here we've got quotations. My apologies for my writing, okay. Quotation made by this user for this client and the amount. And then here we've got invoices, okay. Okay, same thing like quotation. This quotation has been made by this user for this client, and here is the amount. And also maybe the pending, the states. Is it already paid? Is it fully paid? Is half paid? And all those things. And then we've got the application here. Okay, we've got the application. And then let's say we've got the UI here. Okay, obviously we feed information to the application and we receive information to the application, but the application doesn't keep the information, okay. So what the application does also, it communicates with the API, okay, communicates with the API, but not necessarily directly with the API. The API will expose endpoints, okay. Let's put our endpoints there, okay. For instance, let's say this endpoint, it's users, okay. Here, when this application hits this endpoint, it will get a list of users. When it hits this endpoint's quotation, it will get a list of quotation. When it hits this endpoint invoices, it will get a list of invoices, okay. And the API, it's responsible for making the queries, okay. Okay, what if then okay, let me just briefly tell you about the nature of this data, okay, the nature of this data, okay. um the database, in order for the database to be efficient, okay, what we are running away from is redundancy, okay, meaning that having multiple records, okay. The first approach in which we can use when we saving information from this database, okay, remember this is a some sort of an SQL database, okay. So meaning that in order for us to save information in this database, we can have a user ID here. Let's say user ID 1, okay, and the name, okay, the name, let's say it's empty, that's the name. and the surname, it's SJ. Okay, we can have this information here. Whenever this user creates the quotation, okay, we can be lazy and make sure that we put these records the same as they are. Okay, we put the quotation ID here, the quotation amount here, and also we repeat this information, the surname, the ID of the user who was making this record, and everything that is involved there. As you can see, we've got a duplication. Why could we do that? Maybe because we want to be clever. We want to create an endpoint here where if we hit this endpoint, okay, we can just pull all of this information without having to get it from here. Okay, as you can see, I can pull a certain quotation which was done by this user. I can get also the user ID from the same table, and also I can get the username and the user surname. As you can see, makes my life easier, but this is redundant and also it's confusing. So in a SQL database, okay, in a structured database like this one, there's something called normalization. Normalization is a technique that has been used to make sure that there is no duplication. Instead of taking this name and surname, we only take the primary key from this table, meaning that this table will be the quotation table plus the primary key from users, which when it lands into the quotation, it's going to be a foreign key. I can explain that later, okay? So meaning that this is the information for the quotation, it ends here. Now we just need to put 01 or number 1 for users, just to say that this record has been placed by this ID. What if we want to know the name of the user in this query, for instance? Okay, now we will need to take this ID and make another query to the users and get the user detail. As you can see, once we start querying, okay, once we start querying for multiple tables, okay, for multiple tables, we are also expanding our queries. Okay, it means that we have to select information from quotation, we have to select information from users. Okay, usually in SQL you inner join the table. Okay, you select from here and inner join this one. Okay, and then you will get the information that you want. The information that you will get is in this fashion. Okay, all the code information plus the user information, code information and the username and the user details, as if it's one table. As you can see, once we start to query from different tables, okay, things are starting to be a little bit difficult in a way. Okay, imagine if we are querying from 3 different tables. Okay, I hope you get that. Let's go back again. We've got the user interface asking information from the app. Okay, and then the app make use of the API, and the API exposes endpoints. What if we want, as you can see, this endpoint is for users, this one is for quotation, and this one is for invoices. It gives you all that information. What if we want to query like information from multiple tables? We need to add another endpoint, which was this one, and this endpoint will query like multiple tables and it will bring this information. Okay, now the other problem, okay, if you only on users, okay, on users on this endpoint, which gives you everything like a list of all users, okay, if you only want one users, you just have to select it and filter it yourself, or create another endpoint that will only give you one user, as you can see. Okay, now let's introduce GraphQL and try to understand the problem that we want to solve. Okay, what if then, instead of getting all the users here, okay, I can only get one user as I want? One might feel like it's simple. You will create another endpoint. No. What if I don't create another endpoint? I just get what I want whenever I want to. Then Tabo will start to be like, wow, is that possible? It's possible with GraphQL Turbo. Let me show you how. Okay, Now we're going to introduce GraphQL here. With GraphQL, number one, you only have one endpoint. Okay? One endpoint, which is, let's say, whatever / GraphQL. Okay? This guy here, application, can I draw this in such a way that it makes sense? Okay? Let me just write a box. This is the endpoint. So this guy here will talk to this endpoint, and it will get everything, and I mean everything it needs, using one endpoint. That's point number one to GraphQL instead of multiple endpoints. Also, this GraphQL, okay, you can just pick, as I have made before. It's like a developer is pushing a shopping cart. Okay, I hope this looks like a shopping cart. A developer is pushing a shopping cart. He is only picking the information that he will need, okay, to use on the UI. Okay, after he's done, he will send the information to the UI to do whatever. Okay, how many endpoints am I going to hit? You are still hitting one endpoint. Okay, maybe you want information about the user, you want information about balances. These are separate endpoints, so it feels like GraphQL doesn't really makes a difference. Okay, what if maybe I want to do something like this? I want to query multiple tables. With GraphQL, the same principle apply. The developer need to take a shopping cart and pick what he wants to pick. This might come from users, it might come from code, it might come from invoices. The information will be bundled by GraphQL and will come as one item, as one thing, meaning that the stress of making multiple queries is gone. That's point number two to the GraphQL. So, meaning that instead of this endpoint getting all the users, you can just get the user that you want. Okay, let me just give you an idea on how are you going to do that, maybe in the front end. Okay, you just write a query that you want. Okay, this is not the actual syntax, but it's something like it. Okay, and then, okay, let me just say undo. Okay, and then you mention I want from users. Okay, this is more like a JSON object. Okay, then you mention I want a username and I want an ID, and that's it. This query will give you exactly what you want. Okay, that's how it happens. As you can see now, it's like GraphQL is helping you to pick what you want. Okay, it can come from whenever. GraphQL will be responsible for that. You just tell it what you want in a true sense of the word, and it will bring it to you. So the problem that GraphQL is trying to solve, number one, let's say multiple endpoints, you are only dealing with one point, okay, a source of truth, okay, or entrance, okay. And then point number two, instead of getting a lot of information that you don't really need, meaning that if you want to get a list of users and also a quotation, and also meaning that you will have to make complex queries. Here you don't make complex queries. GraphQL will handle that for you. Okay, so instead of getting a list of all users, you can just pick the fields that you want. Very simple. GraphQL will handle the rest. Okay, sometimes when you want only one field, okay, it will mean you have to create an endpoint that will give you one field, okay, which is, this is under fetching, because maybe at some point you might quickly want a lot of fields. Okay, switching from one field to many or to none, it's very easy with GraphQL. So GraphQL feels like not only it's some sort of a doorway to your data. Okay, not only it's a doorway to your data, it feels like GraphQL, GQL, it feels like it is your data. It feels like that. Okay. When you are using it, it feels like it is your data. It's like you are actually inside your database picking what you want to pick. So I hope you get the idea of what problem is GraphQL trying to solve. I am Matthew, the hybrid, the designer and developer. If you feel like this video is adding value in banning the concept so that when you're being asked in an interview about GraphQL, at least you can be able to answer those questions. If you follow a YouTube tutorial that codes only, you might know the syntax, but you might not be able to explain what GraphQL is trying to solve. I'm Matthew Msingati, the hybrid, the designer and developer. Thank you so much for clicking this video and also for supporting my channel. Otherwise, for me, see you on the next one. What's up and welcome. I am Matthew, the hybrid, the designer and developer. Thank you so much for clicking this video. This is a series of GraphQL videos centered around banning the concept of GraphQL into your brain. Instead of getting into being technical and follow me kind of a style, do this, do that, I've decided to step back and try to understand why it was difficult for me to understand the concept of GraphQL. And I realized that I have been watching a lot of tutorials where I was learning the syntax, but I was not equipped to answer interview questions. Questions like what GraphQL is trying to solve and what techniques is it using to do that? What technologies are affected? What is it trying to replace? How efficient is GraphQL? So I couldn't be able to answer those questions. So I created this series. If you're new here, please check other videos. Now, the techniques that are used in GraphQL. Obviously, I don't know the actual technical code, but I am hoping to give you the concept. Okay, so let's just quickly talk about the history of getting data from the database so that we can contrast it to the techniques that are being used. Okay, so here we are going to be very swift. We are not going to explain a lot of things. Let's say we've got two tables, table number 1 for users and table number 2 for employees. We've got an app here that wants to get the information from this database. Okay, this is a database from this database. However, it cannot do that without obviously an API, application programming interface. Okay, this API exposes endpoints. Okay, where if you hit this endpoint, you can get a list of users. If you hit this endpoint, you can get a list of employees. Okay, as you can see, this is what is going on here. Obviously, the challenge will be if you get into these users, it gives you a list of users, whereas maybe you only wanted a certain field there. Okay, which is with GraphQL, it's that simple. Okay, and also GraphQL doesn't have multiple endpoints, it only has got one endpoint. Okay, now how is GraphQL achieving all of this? Okay, so this is your database. Okay, this technique, I'm hoping it's going to help you when you are watching a technical video on YouTube where they are coding, so that you can start to feel like you understand the terms and you know why they are doing what they are doing. Because in most cases, obviously, they won't explain in details because the video is about coding anyway. Okay, you've got your DB sitting here. Okay, now, instead of API as a middleman, we've got GraphQL as a middleman. Okay, we've got GraphQL as a middleman. Okay, let me just write this. And then we've got the application here. Okay, and then we've got the application. Okay, so what's the technique that GraphQL is using in order to do whatever that it wants to do? Point number 1, it is not database specific. Okay, meaning that here you can use any database in this section. Okay, you can use any database. You can use an SQL, okay, based database, and you can use a NoSQL database, meaning that any database here you can use. As you are starting to see that, oh, GraphQL, it's not the database, okay, but it's a query language, okay. So meaning that it is not a database. My apologies about that. I don't know what's that black screen thing, okay. So it's not a database, meaning that in this section you can some sort of add any database. It can work, okay. And then now the technique that GraphQL is using, number one, GraphQL wants to know more information, okay. It's like GraphQL wants to make some informed decision. GraphQL wants to help you, okay. GraphQL, it's like a psychologist, okay, or what can I say, a psychiatrist, okay, somebody who will ask you more question in order to understand the core and the essence of your own problem, so that they can meet you halfway, okay. So the more you reveal to them, the better for them to help you, or it becomes easier for them to help you. GraphQL is doing that. That's the approach. It asks you more about your information. Remember, GraphQL doesn't want to know your database. It doesn't want to know, okay? It's not interested in it. It's not interested in it, okay. And also what it wants to know, because here you can use a lot of databases, okay. What it wants to know when I'm talking about the more info, it wants to know the structure, okay. It wants to know the structure of your database, okay. It's like an engine, okay. The engine of a car has got some certain things which can be found in a different engine, okay, in a different car, in a different model, but an engine in an engine, okay. So meaning that all the engine conforms to a certain structure, okay, or certain architecture, or certain way of the building blocks are the same, okay. Things might be different, but the building blocks are the same, okay. So GraphQL is just looking for that architecture from which your engine is being built, okay. Let's put things into some sort of into practicality. In your database, you've got tables or collections, okay. Let me put a user or users, okay. Inside users, we've got a user ID, and also for simplicity, let's say a user name, okay. This is a collection, okay. In this ID, you are expecting numbers, and the name, you want the name to be a string, okay. So this is the structure of your database, okay. So GraphQL wants to know the structure. Let's just ask a general question. Why GraphQL wants to know this structure, okay. GraphQL is going to act on your behalf, okay, making things super simple for you, okay. So it needs to know the structure of a database, not the database itself. It needs to know how is the data structured, okay. Let's say GraphQL receive a query for only getting a user ID, okay, meaning that GraphQL needs to know that there is a user ID here, okay. Imagine if GraphQL is looking for an ID number which is not here. That's a problem. So meaning that you need some sort of create a mirror image of what is in here, not in terms of the actual data and numbers, but in terms of the structure, so that GraphQL can also have the same copy somewhere in here, so that GraphQL can have the same copy. So everything that is here, it's also something that is here. So by telling us or giving it the essence of what it is, you are just making it easier for you to help you. It's like a psychiatrist, somebody who's asking you more about your behavior so that they can meet you halfway. So if you don't tell them more about yourself, So it means that they won't tell you much. Obviously, most drug addicts and people who are addicted, when they are being asked by a psychiatrist about a lot of things, usually they don't give more information. As a result, they cannot be helped. So GraphQL is asking this structure so that it can be confident and know true and true that when it's making the queries, okay, the information will always be there. Okay, I hope you get that one. So continuing, now that GraphQL knows your structure, okay, which this one ticks, it knows your structure. Also, it wants to facilitate the communication between GraphQL and your user interface. Okay, meaning that you've got the user interface here. Okay, now the user interface might ask for, okay, let's say it might ask for an ID number which doesn't exist in the database. Okay, now since GraphQL is aware of the structure, then GraphQL obviously will know that we have a problem here. The UI is asking for an ID number which we don't have it on the actual database, which is, it's important because now GraphQL is acting as some sort of a facilitator here. Okay, because GraphQL wants to make things easier for you. Okay, now let's bring this knowledge, okay, into more of a practical and terminology that you might hear on other videos. Okay, so this structure, we've been talking about a structure a lot. This structure is referred to as a schema. Okay, you will see this word a lot, more especially when you are using MongoDB. Okay, MongoDB, you will have to also to define a schema. Okay, so a schema, it's like your field names and their corresponding data types. Okay, we've got a schema. So now we have reached the first technique, or the first way in which GraphQL functions. Okay, number one, it wants more information from you. Particularly, it wants the schema. So it's like it's having a mirrored copy of your database, not the actual content, but the structure. Okay, so after that, GraphQL will have to make changes. GraphQL will have to update the database. GraphQL will have to act on your behalf to make things simpler for you. So meaning that what it does, it also asks you not only the structure now, okay, but number two, it asks you the functions, okay, the functions that are associated with this structure. Okay, for instance, we've got users. Okay, we can, when we're querying the information from a database, we might get a user by ID, whereby I can say, give me a lot of information about ID number one. Okay, then I will get all the information. Okay, so there are functions associated with this schema. Okay, so meaning that if you are just defining things for me, you are not really doing something in terms of action. Okay, because defining is like to say Matthew is a programmer. Okay, that means you are not, there is no function. Okay, there's no process going on. Okay, but if I'm saying I am going to call Matthew for you, it means that there is some sort of a function going on. I am going to do something. So after you've got your schema, you need to have a list of functions, okay, that will assist the schema, okay, or that will get the information according to the schema. I think that's the right way. Okay, so this function will organize information for you according to the schema. So those function might be obviously this one. Okay, get user. Okay, get user by ID, or get all users. Okay, so in this function, okay, we are going to in this function part, let's say you are going to have get user by ID. My apologies for my bad writing. And also get all users. Okay, and also get all users. Okay, these just a moment, okay. Let's come here on this schema, okay. Let's give this schema a name, okay, because I think schema might not really be the name that is used in GraphQL. I think the actual name, it's type definition, okay, type defs, okay. This is a short form for it, okay, type def. So these are type definition, the structure and the types of your own data. And then after that, we've got these functions which are responsible for executing, for getting the actual data for you. And the actual name that is being used, these are then called resolvers. Okay, so these are called resolvers. Okay, so we have some sort of landed into two of the most important terms in GraphQL, which is type definitions and resolvers. Okay, now let's formulate some sort of a relationship between the type definitions and resolvers. I think I'm going to need a new page here. Okay, so now we've got type defs. Okay, we've got type definition. Okay, so now if you are watching any other YouTube tutorial and you hear them talking about type defs, now at least you know what type definitions are. And also when they are talking about the resolvers, you know what resolvers are. Okay, so the type definition, let's continue with the users. Okay, we've got users, and then we've got an ID, which is a number, and we've got a name, which is a string. Okay, the name is a string. Okay, this is a type definition. Okay, and then in resolvers, okay, because we need to have functions, okay, that are associated with the type definition. Okay, for instance, we might have let's say get users and get user by ID. Remember, here we are just banning concept. Okay, that means you have to supply the actual ID. Okay, so here we are just banning the concept. Okay, so as you can see, there is a relationship between the type definitions and the resolvers, because the resolvers are functions that get the data according to the type definition. For instance, you can't have on resolvers get employees, whereas on type definition you don't have the employees. As you can see, that's some sort of an inconsistency there. Okay, so it means that as we have get users in defining this, okay, for instance, let's say when this function is getting the users, what type is it expecting to receive? It's expecting to receive a type of user, okay, a structure of user. So in GraphQL, you will also need to mention that, even though maybe the syntax might not be the same, but you are telling GraphQL that this get user will receive an information which is structured in this way, in this type definition. So do you see the relationship between the definition and the resolver? Okay, and also in get by ID, okay, you will need to tell it that, okay, the actual data that it's going to get, for instance here, okay, it's getting the users, okay, but since it's going to be a list of users, here we might say this is the best way to put this. The type is going to be a user because it's in this form, but remember it's going to be an array, meaning that when it's going to be an array, it's going to be user1, user2. All those things will come in form of an array. Obviously we will label that data. Okay, so now here when we get a user by ID, we are going to get the actual user. Okay, not an array, but we are going to get only one user. This is the relationship between type definitions and resolvers, and you must keep it this way. As soon as you you treat resolvers as different things and type definition as different things, then it's not going to be easier for you to understand GraphQL. I'm Matthew, the hybrid, the designer and developer. If you feel like this video is adding value into your own overall understanding of GraphQL, please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. See you on the next one.